Capio, and welcome to another edition of News in Review. The easy access to online posting means that anyone can write something, publish it, and claim it is the truth. But fake news is permeating the online world with disinformation and lies. Diana Swain has this look at what happens when the public start believing the lies.
28-year-old Edgar Welch accused of firing an assault weapon inside the Comet Ping Pong pizza restaurant.
Gun violence in a big U.S. city, hardly a headline anymore. But this was different.
Police say that Welch told them that he showed up at the D.C. pizza restaurant to get to the bottom of what appears to be an utterly bogus story about child abuse.
That's right, the gunman admitting he was self-investigating what's been dubbed online as Pizzagate, a fake news story that claims Washington, D.C.'s Comet Ping Pong restaurant is a front for a child sex ring connected to Hillary Clinton and her former campaign chairman, John Podesta.
This case shows how fake news can lead to a dangerous situation.
Pizzagate is a made-up story that was peddled online by Clinton's opponents in the weeks before the U.S. election. Conspiracy theorists picked it up, and it started spreading throughout the internet. Social media sites like Reddit have tried to rein in the story.
But others, including President-elect Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and his son, are keeping the hashtag alive.
Flynn's son was in fact dropped by Trump's transition team this week for continuing to push the fake story. The owner of Comet Ping Pong, meanwhile, has been forced to deny his business is a front for pedophiles.
Let me state unequivocally, these stories are completely and entirely false.
But his business and those nearby have been repeatedly harassed and threatened.
The websites also claim that there's a secret underground tunnel running from the pizza restaurant up the store to the Politics and Prose bookstore to traffic in children.
Another piece of fiction having real consequences for people like Bradley Graham, the owner of Politics and Prose. So, Bradley, tell us what it was like to experience firsthand the kind of harassment that came with Pizzagate.
It was nuts. I mean, when we first became aware of this story around the time of the election, you know, we thought it was just so absurd nobody would believe it. But then we saw it spreading, and we became, at Politics and Prose, like other neighboring businesses, the recipient of threatening social media and menacing phone calls. We started meeting together with other owners on the block to try to come up with some way to counter this, all the while worried that it could go from being just verbal online assaults to something physical and more dangerous, which is exactly what happened last Sunday.
As you were meeting as a group of local businesses saying, look, this has long since stopped being funny or weird, were you reaching out to police, and what kind of response were you getting?
We were reporting the phone calls and the messages to both the local police and the FBI, and we did get some more local police attention. But you know, they, in sympathy with law enforcement, there's a lot of this stuff going on in a lot of places, and so their resources are stretched thin, and they also have a very high bar that has to be crossed before they can take a more aggressive action. Of course, that bar was crossed last Sunday when the gunman walked into Comet.
And, you know, as we say, you're a bookstore owner now, but you were in fact a journalist with the Washington Post for 30 years, practicing the craft of journalism, of finding truth. What is it like for you to be caught up in this fake news torrent now?
Look, on one level, I get what's happening. Many people have less confidence in the conventional sources of information. They're looking for other sources of fact. But what's happened is, to fill this void, you have these entirely fictitious, in the case of Pizzagate, hateful conspiracy theories that are jumping up. And you know, it'd be nice if people began to exercise a little more good judgment and common sense about what to believe.
Do you think that there's a way to rein this in?
It's appearing in so many places. It just looks so hard to try to control.
Well, thankfully, what happened last weekend was no more than the one shot fired that didn't hit anyone. Thanks very much for talking to us. Stay safe.
Thank you.
You can convince yourself of just about anything when you want to believe a conspiracy theory.
Words that are ringing truer every day as fake stories like Pizzagate are shared online by millions of people, all part of a growing phenomenon that's been getting lots of attention since the U.S. election campaign.
The biggest ones include that Mrs. Clinton sold weapons to ISIS, that the Pope endorsed Donald Trump, that Ireland was accepting American refugees fleeing Donald Trump.
So where do these stories come from? And how often do people who read them actually believe them?
I was surprised by a 75% number of people believing those headlines.
BuzzFeed's Craig Silverman has spent a lot of time trying to answer those questions, and his findings have been astonishing. It was Silverman who discovered a hub of fake news websites based in a small town in Macedonia, where teenagers peddled bogus stories to Americans, hoping to make big bucks from the ensuing clicks.
About 200 people, maybe.
200 people?
Yeah.
And making fake news websites?
Yes.
A real story that's been picked up by news outlets around the world. But it's Silverman's forensic analysis of how Pizzagate got started that has a lot of people talking this week. So let's start there. How did you track back to the origins of this story?
One of the weird things is that I was looking at it before I knew it was going to turn into Pizzagate. I started seeing these really strange, unhinged claims going from one website to the next that Hillary Clinton was about to be arrested any moment for running a child sex ring. And this was appearing on a bunch of obviously very fringe websites, the kind that I tend to look at and watch. And I was wondering, where was this coming from and why was this suddenly starting to get out there? And this was actually before Election Day.
And you tracked it back to a tweet.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of connected this idea of a pedophile ring to an imminent arrest for Hillary Clinton was this tweet, and this is sent by an account. The photo was actually taken. I've seen this photo used on white supremacist websites. This is a person who claims to be a lawyer in New York, but it's pretty clear to me in looking at it, it's really a white supremacist account who was tweeting a lot about false things about the election. And so this tweet kind of starts it, saying that, there's rumors that the NYPD is that the emails that they had been looking at on one of Clinton's advisors' laptops was going to point to a pedophilia ring, and that Clinton was at the center of it.
Okay, so how does this story get from one tweet, 140 characters, to something so large that, this guy goes into the pizza joint with an assault rifle?
Yeah, so there's a few threads that come in. One of the background things that's important to note is that even, months before this, people on a lot of these fringe sites have been talking about Bill Clinton's connection to a man named Jeffrey Epstein, who is a billionaire and a registered sex offender. And Bill Clinton had flown on his plane a few times, and people had sort of been saying, oh, when this comes out, it's going to take down the Clintons. And so that groundwork was there. And then as we got closer to Election Day and as these additional emails were being looked at by the FBI, we started to see people like him trying to spin a news story that the NYPD knows that there's something really incriminating on these emails.
And then it gets to these larger websites, because you were saying it was sort of the fringe stuff first, but then it starts to get on places like 4chan and Reddit.
Yeah, and the key thing about that is throughout the election, people on 4chan and Reddit, pro-Trump people or people who just kind of want to throw a monkey wrench into things have been just coming up with false ideas and false things to spread. It was almost a daily activity. And in particular, they were doing it when new releases came from the WikiLeaks leaks of John Podesta's emails. And so every time a new leak came out from WikiLeaks, people would try to invent new stories around it. And so this one tweet starts getting picked up. It's on Reddit, it's on 4chan. They start talking about it, and eventually some conspiracy websites start to kind of pull disparate things together, including that tweet, to say, yes, this is about to happen.
We heard you say a couple of minutes ago, the findings of a poll done by BuzzFeed and Ipsos that found that 75% of Americans shown a bunch of headlines believed the fake ones. When the number's that high, how do you ever start to dial this back?
I mean, it's really difficult, and I think one of the reasons is that the way we consume media and information has really fundamentally changed. At the core of that are things like Facebook, where before I might choose to watch a certain newscast at night, I might read a certain newspaper, I'd know what it is, and sort of know what's being put together to make it. On Facebook, everything just kind of looks the same, and it goes by you. And so stuff that kind of appeals to your beliefs and your interests are going to be more interesting to you. You're going to click on those, you're going to share them. And the more that you do that, the more Facebook feeds you more of that. So we have this machine that's kind of learning what you like.
It's just reinforcing the narrative you like best.
And it potentially puts you off in kind of a corner where you just sort of see one picture of the world. And so people who were, virulently pro-Trump, they would see things like this about Clinton about to be arrested, and it would really resonate with them. They'd get an emotional reaction. It would reinforce that Trump's going to win, and they might react to it strongly on Facebook and help it spread.
Which shows why it's going to be tough to dial back. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Fake news went viral during the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, to the point it may have actually affected the results. Since then, two of the most influential social media companies, Google and Facebook, announced measures aimed at halting the spread. The CBC's David Common looks at the epidemic of fake news and why it's happening.
Dndjd.com, we all know Dndjd.com. We'll talk about that kind of category of fake news.
Pity the journalists in training. Newspapers are collapsing, jobs are scarce, and fake news is getting more interest in the real thing. Drunk Hillary beat Bill up on election night. This after the Pope endorsed Trump and Clinton's secret ties to ISIS were revealed. None of it real, of course, but it was prolific during the campaign and maybe decisive.
If we can't discriminate between serious arguments and propaganda, then we have problems.
Sure, there's been political misinformation, even propaganda, for as long as there's been politics. And the Washington Post today reports a sophisticated Russian propaganda effort was at play during the election, using automated botnets and a team of Russian trolls to amplify those fake news sites. But those actually writing the stories, well, they're motivated by something completely different. Craig Silverman with BuzzFeed Canada has spent months analyzing the phenomenon of fake news during the election.
It has nothing to do with ideology. It has nothing to do with corporate interests. It's just purely a profit motive.
Take Liberty Writers News, for instance. Started by two out-of-work college grads, from home they gained 300,000 Facebook followers in October alone, with admittedly unsubstantiated headlines like "Breaking, top officials set to testify against Hillary Clinton found dead," "Obama birth secrets revealed," and "Michelle Obama holds feminist rally at her slave house." The site founders told the Washington Post the ad traffic from all those people reading those headlines made them 20 years of wages in just 6 months.
Every fake news website operator that I've spoken to knows that if you can appeal to people's deeply held beliefs, you're probably going to get more traffic and earn more money. And so the more polarized people are, the more they're receptive to extreme hoaxes, extreme fake news.
And that, says Silverman, will continue. He found that fake news stories were shared far more on Facebook than real ones in the final 3 months of the presidential campaign.
Humans love to consume information that confirms what they believe. And so naturally, Facebook becomes this massive mechanism for confirmation bias, of showing us more and more of what we already think. And there's a phenomenon called group polarization, where the more that you're around people who think the same way you do, the more extreme your views become.
Only now is Facebook realizing its role. It provides a professional space for fake news. "We take misinformation seriously," Mark Zuckerberg posted recently. Now, in the aftermath of the election, Facebook will work to identify and limit fake news in its timelines. But it will also target the real aim, that's money, by stopping advertising on the fake news stories, denying revenue to those writing outrageous and untrue headlines.
If you think that Hillary is plotting to bring terrorists into the United States, literally plotting to do that, would you also believe in alien invasion? Where would it stop?
That was what Mark Chacon set out to answer. A registered Republican, he started realtruenews.org to show how ridiculous fake news could be by trying to be even more over the top. But people believed it.
The idea was that when they posted something about Obama signs, I don't know, Muslims are coming to invade, I would then post that there was like an actual shooting war in Texas, that ISIS had come storming across the border.
So how did this happen? Social media can be an echo chamber, but there's also so much now available.
I don't think it's that we're getting dumber. I think that humans actually aren't used to having as much information at their fingertips as we are. And so what happens is, particularly people who've grown up and maybe they always watch the same newscast and read the same newspaper, all of a sudden on Facebook, they've got all this different stuff coming at them. It's all created in this, coming in this same kind of package, and they don't know to necessarily check the website that it came from.
This site, by the way,
that sentiment reverberates back at the journalism school.
We'll get to understand the conventions of fake news more. We'll be able to identify it, and we'll be able to censor ourselves what we're reading, and we'll be able to sort of identify fake news just in the way that we identified spam email, 10 years ago.
For his students, the future peddlers of real news, it's yet another challenge.
I guess we as journalists have to prove that the media isn't all bad. And I guess you as a journalist, and me as a journalist, and everybody as a journalist, we really have to show the public that they can trust us still.
We have to try our best to put out what we believe to be credible and real news and trustworthy news.
And yet, as many journalists learn early in their careers, to find the story, you follow the money. And the money is flowing to the fakes. David Commons, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, award-winning journalist Christian Amanpour is CNN's chief international correspondent and host of CNN's nightly global affairs program. She is extremely outspoken about the abuse of media and journalism with what she calls the virus of fake news. She spoke to CBC's Diana Swain on The Investigators about what real journalists must do to counter it.
Christian, you recently gave a speech in which you said that it was important for journalists not to lose their nerve now in light of the backlash they're getting, but to recommit to real reporting. Why do you believe that's so imperative right now?
Well, for several reasons, Diana. Good to be with you. Number one, the Donald Trump campaign suddenly put the fate and the safety and the freedom of American journalists right in the focus. And people were being targeted at rallies with all sorts of hateful rhetoric, journalists being called by Donald Trump despicable and dishonest, the most lying people he'd ever met, etc., etc. So this is something that's unacceptable. There is no First Amendment right to threaten the safety and the freedom of American journalists. By contrast, there is a First Amendment right for American journalists to operate in freedom and safety. So taking all that, we realize now that we have to actually fight to defend that space. Not just our rights, but the factual space. Because, Diana, what all this coincides with is this terrible tsunami, this virus of fake news, otherwise known as lies, which are peddled across social media, places like Facebook, with a massive, wide distribution. So for all those reasons, we have to fight to defend facts right now in what's being described as a post-truth world.
You cited a tweet sent out by Donald Trump, in fact, right after his win, when there were still demonstrators in the streets. And he said they were professional protesters incited by the media. What about that concerned you?
Well, my blood ran cold when I saw that. First and foremost, the idea of professional protesters has been debunked by the very fake news writer who wrote it and made it up. But the second most importantly chilling thing was to hear the words incited by the media. Those are the kinds of words that we hear in the non-democratic part of the world, if you like, in places where authoritarian leaders blame the press, demonize the press, use the press as the organized opposition. They target the press and set the press up as an opposition to their government. And they do it by subtly ratcheting up the accusations against the press. So inciting, sympathizing, associating, actually being terrorists and subversives. And as you know, journalists around the world are routinely locked up, put in jail, put on trial on phony charges. So that's why that worried me very much, and I felt I had to, push back on that and take a stand against that.
It's not just Trump, though, who's been critical of the media. Have journalists lost the public trust?
In general, the establishment press has lost some of the trust of the public. I would submit that it's for several reasons. One, and most especially, because of the tsunami of fake news that purports to be real news and therefore compromises the truth and therefore compromises what people believe to be the media. I would say also by the extreme political partisanship and the tribal corners that the press has been forced into in this hyper-political, hyper-partisan landscape. And then I would say one more thing, that we must not just be talking heads. Our credibility is grounded in our experience and our unique experience as the eyes and ears of our viewers, our audience, our readers, our listeners, whoever are the consumers and our constituents, the people who we owe the basic truth about what's going on around the world. The fact that we're doing less of that on-the-ground reporting, I think, comes back to hurt us. So I really do hope that this moment is one where there's a call to arms to defend the fact-based landscape, to defend the truth, and to defend and recommit to a much greater real reportage around the world in every nook and cranny that we need to be in.
Christiane, thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Unfortunately, fake news won't disappear anytime soon, so it's up to readers to weigh the facts and do independent research in order to determine what is true and what is untrue on the web. And that is News in Review. For more on
So you guys can now work to finish that or any of that other homework up on the board there for the rest.
Is that just pages 1 to 4, right?
Yeah, 1 to 4.